Welcome to Roots and Rest, a place where you can leave your day's troubles behind. Tonight's story is called The Quiet Waters of the Lake. In the fold of a forgotten valley, where the hills curved gently like sleeping shoulders, there rested a lake so still it seemed to hold the sky itself. The villagers who lived far beyond the reeds called it Moonmere, not because the moon rose there first, or shone brighter there than anywhere else, but because on calm nights the water reflected the stars so clearly that it felt less like looking into a lake and more like peering into another world beneath the earth. Near the shore of Moonmere stood a small cottage, wrapped in ivy and climbing white roses. The cottage belonged to a woman named Sylvaine. She lived alone, though never lonely. The birds knew her windowsill well. Deer wandered calmly through her garden at dawn. Foxgloves leaned against her fence posts in summer, and bundles of drying herbs hung beside her door through every season. Some in distant villages whispered that she was a witch, but only in the way old stories speak of witches. A woman who understood the name of plants, a woman who listened more than she spoke, a woman who could tell when rain was coming simply by the scent of the wind drifting over the lake. Sylvaine herself never called it magic. She simply called it paying attention. And on this particular evening, as dusk settled softly over Moonmere, she moved quietly through her cottage preparing for nightfall. A kettle warmed slowly above the hearth. Bundles of lavender and chamomile rested on the table. The windows stood open, letting in the cool breath of evening and the distant sound of frogs singing among the reeds. Outside, the lake shimmered silver blue beneath the fading sky. Sylvaine wrapped a moss green shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the garden with a small lantern in hand. The flame inside glowed low and amber, barely brighter than the fireflies beginning to rise from the grasses. She walked slowly along the narrow path, leading towards the shore. The earth was soft beneath her boots. Wild thyme released its scent beneath each careful step. Somewhere far off, an owl called once through the trees. Moonmere waited in silence. The water tonight was perfectly calm. Sylvaine paused at the edge of the shore. Wooden rowing boat rested among the reeds. The boat had belonged to her grandmother once, long before the cottage became hers. Its wood was weathered smooth by time and water, and tiny pale mushrooms grew from one corner where the damp lingered longest. She placed her lantern carefully inside and loosened the rope from its post. Then, with slow, familiar movements, she stepped into the boat and pushed away from the shore. The lake welcomed her gently. The water barely stirred as she drifted outward beneath the deepening twilight. Above her, the first stars appeared, one by one. The sky slowly softened from blue into velvet indigo. Sylvaine rested the oars across her lap and simply floated. This had become her ritual over the years. Not every night, only on evenings when the world felt especially loud in memory, when thoughts crowded too heavily, when old worries lingered like tangled thread. The lake had a way of quieting things, not by taking thoughts away, but by making them softer around the edges. She breathed slowly, letting the cool night air fill her lungs. The scent of water lilies drifted across the surface. The reeds whispered quietly near the shoreline. Far below the boat, tiny silver fish moved like flickers of moonlight beneath the water. Sylvaine tilted her head towards the stars. There were so many tonight, enough to make a person feel wonderfully small, enough to remind her that rest was part of nature too. The trees rested in winter. The lake rested at night. Even the moon disappeared each month for a while before returning whole again. Nothing in the natural world demanded endless movement. Nothing bloomed forever. Nothing carried summer through every season. And somehow remembering that always brought her peace. The boat drifted further towards the centre of Moonmere. Here the water darkened into deep blue-black, reflecting the stars so clearly that the boundary between sky and lake almost vanished. Sylvaine closed her eyes for a moment. The boat rocked gently beneath her, back and forth, slow and steady, like breathing, like sleep approaching quietly through an open door. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something familiar along the far shoreline. A single lantern glowing among the trees, warm gold against the dark forest. She smiled softly. Old Mara was awake tonight. Mara lived in a tiny cabin hidden deep among the pines beyond the lake. She was older than anyone could guess, with long silver hair, usually braided with rosemary stems and tiny feathers. Some claimed she once spoke to crows. Others insisted she could cure bad dreams using only tea and river stones. Sylvaine suspected most of the stories were invented by children. Still, Mara did make remarkable tea. The lantern flickered once between the trees before disappearing again. Sylvaine watched the darkness settle around the shoreline. Then she lay carefully back against the boat, shawl gathered beneath her head like a pillow. Above her stretched an endless sky. The stars shimmered softly. A faint ribbon of mist began curling across the lake surface, silver in the moonlight. Everything felt hushed, ancient, safe. The kind of silence that asks nothing from you. No rushing, no proving, no becoming, only resting. Sylvaine listened to the gentle creak of wood beneath her, to the distant rustle of leaves, to the tiny sounds of water touching the side of the boat. And slowly, her thoughts drifted like clouds passing across the moon. She remembered summers spent gathering blackberries with stained fingertips, rainstorms watched safely from attic windows, her grandmother humming beside the hearth while bundles of mint dried overhead. feeling of falling asleep wrapped in blankets, while wind moved through the trees outside. Simple memories. Small memories. Yet somehow the ones that linger longest. The boat continued drifting. Time moved differently on Moonmere. Slower somehow, as though the lake itself encouraged stillness. The moon climbed higher overhead now, pale and luminous. Its reflection stretched silver across the water in a long, shimmering path. Sylvaine reached one hand lazily over the edge of the boat, letting her fingertips brush the cold lake surface. Ripples spread outward in slow circles. The stars trembled softly in the water and settled again. She wondered, not for the first time, how people had stood beside this lake over the centuries seeking peace. Travellers, fishermen, wandering healers, tired souls carrying heavy thoughts. Perhaps that was why Moonmere felt the way it did. Perhaps every quiet moment ever spent there had settled gently into the water itself, stored like moonlight beneath the surface. The mist thickened slightly as midnight approached. Not heavy or frightening, only soft, like drifting through clouds. Sylvaine pulled her shawl closer and listened to the distant croak of frogs along the weeds. Somewhere nearby, water lapped quietly against stone. The world felt very far away now. The busy roads, the hurried voices, the endless noise of places beyond the valley. Here there was only water, sky, breathing, stillness, and slowly sleepiness began settling over her like falling snow. Gentle, gradual, warm despite the cool air. Her eyelids grew heavy. The rocking boat moved with perfect rhythm. Back and forth, back and forth. The lake carrying her softly through the night. She imagined the reeds bowing sleepily beneath the moonlight. The fox curled safely in its den beneath tree roots. The bird tucked beneath their wings high in the branches. Even the hills themselves seemed to sleep around Moonmere, and so Sylvaine allowed herself to rest too, like a candle dimming, like embers settling in a hearth. She watched clouds drift lazily past the moon, counted distant owl calls, listened to water against wood, each sound softer than the last, each moment quieter, until thoughts no longer felt important enough to follow. The lantern inside the boat glowed faintly beside her, golden and calm. Its reflection danced gently across the water. Above, the stars wheeled silently through the night sky. And somewhere along the distant shoreline, hidden among pine trees and herbs and old stories, Mara's lantern glimmed once more before fading into darkness. Moonmere held everything gently. The mist, the moon, the drifting boat, the woman wrapped in a green shawl beneath the stars. Nothing hurried here. Nothing demanded wakefulness. Only rest. Only quiet. Only the soft promise that morning would arrive eventually, and there was no need to rush towards it. So the lake drifted onward beneath the moonlight, and Sylvaine, cradled by water and stars, slowly fell asleep.